Let's start discussing cardiac physiology. Cardiac cells are different than skeletal fibers or skeletal muscle cells because, well, for a couple of reasons. The main reason is because in between each muscle fiber, there's an intercalated disc. This is because the action potential, the spark, the electrical spark, has to get from one cell to another cell really quick. Because with skeletal muscle, if I want to lift something, like I want to lift this mouse, right? So I'm going to contract my bicep and I'm going to lift this mouse, right? But that doesn't really, even for someone like me, it's not too difficult. But if I want to lift like the table that this laptop's on, if I want to lift the whole table with just one arm, right now all my bicep muscles are going to be recruited into that, and I'm going to be using all of them. So with skeletal muscle, you kind of can use some of your muscles, or you can recruit more muscles depending on what the task is. With the heart, it's not like that. The whole thing's got to go. So when you're contracting the atria, they all have to contract at the same time. All the muscle fibers or cells need to contract at the same time. So because of that, we have in between these muscle fibers or muscle cells, intercalated discs. And in these intercalated discs are openings, gap junctions. And that's what's allowing the action potential to go from one cell to another extremely quickly. So let's talk about how, in general, like where this action potential emanates and where it terminates. So we're starting here up in the right atrium, and as you can see, number one is the sinoatrial node. So the SA node is known as the pacemaker of the heart. It's up in the right atrium. That's where it all starts. And from there, you can see the arrows where the action potential kind of radiates out, and it's covering now both of the atria, and then it goes to the AV node. The AV node, by the way, if the SA node stopped working, the AV node can kind of pick up that impulse and start acting like an SA node. It's not going to be perfect, of course, but it will work to some point, right? And then from there, you follow it, and it goes down the septum, right? And so here's like a bundle branch, the atrioventricular bundle, and then it becomes the left and the right branches. Now we're firmly in the ventricular septum, in between the two ventricles. Right? So you have the left and the right bundle branches. You'll hear of common heart problem would be a bundle block. So that would be in here. So something's going on in here. Something's blocking the transmission of that action potential. Or, it could be kind of like at the different end, they could be acting like pacemakers and causing someone's heart to be tachycardic, and you would have to go in there and perform ablation on all those little areas. But anyway, bundle block, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about in here. And then if you look at these bundle branches, they curve around the apex of the heart, and they go up on each side of the ventricle. And those are the Purkinje fibers. So that's it. That's the cardiac conduction system of the heart. So I'd like to talk about what makes the cells contract. What makes them contract? And then there's different stages, right? So I'm going to go to another slide to explain this one. But as you see here, we have these terms: depolarization, plateau, and repolarization. So depolarization is, well, let me show you. Okay, so here we have a cell, and we have the area outside of the cell, right? So within everywhere in the body, you can divide everywhere in our body into intracellular compartments and extracellular compartments. So Intracellular is in blue here, and that's, so we imagine that that's inside of a heart cell, or a muscle cell. And then extracellular is everything outside of it. Well, there's different electrolytes or minerals that act in your body. And if you remember from biology, these minerals all have charges. They're all anions. So either they're cations, being positively charged, or they're anions, being negatively charged. Here we're talking all about cations. So if you notice, all these are positively charged. So we have three different minerals here. We have sodium, so that's the Na, and then you have calcium. I almost said chlorine. We have calcium, and that's a Ca, and technically calcium has two positive charges, but I just put one. So we have calcium and sodium, and they like to hang out on the outside. These are extracellular cations, meaning that they want to be on the outside of the cell. They'll go inside, but they want to be on the outside. And then inside the cell here, you see that there's potassium. So K is for potassium. Potassium is an intracellular anion, intracellular cation. It likes to hang out inside of cells, and it's a cation. And right now, if you look at this, the numbers are roughly the same, right? Now, I mean, obviously there's like more potassium inside and there's no potassium outside, but what I'm talking about is like let's look at the positive charges, right? So as far as being cations, they're roughly the same inside and outside the cell. So we call that's a polarized cell. There's not much going on right now as far as electrical activity, right? So when things are equal on both sides, things don't happen in the body. So what's going to happen is you have to throw off this balance. And so let's do that. So as you noticed here, the sodium has now rushed into the cell. And so now it's no longer polarized, it's depolarized. So a few things that you notice, I tried to make these are supposed to represent like sodium channels, like gates that are just for sodium. But anyway, so sodium goes in. Calcium likes to hang out with sodium, but calcium is really nice. Calcium's like a door holder, right? So calcium's holding open the door for all the sodium to go in. Then once all the sodium's gone in, the calcium will start trickling in. So that's why I've got some of the calcium on the outside right now. So what we have is the sodium's rushed inside. There's the potassium. You've now depolarized this cell. That is how the action potential starts. So that was number one on this thing right here. Rapid depolarization due to blah, 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 blah. The sodium ran into the cell. That causes depolarization. That's going to result in a muscle contraction. Not the same thing though, right? Because we're talking just about electrical impulse. The actual mechanical contraction of the cell is technically something different. But yes, the depolarization is going to result in a contraction. So let's look at the next phase, plateau. Because look what's happened. A couple of the potassium have left the cell. So if that keeps happening, you're going to end up with repolarization, right? So it's not going to be depolarized anymore. So what happens is that some of the potassium's kind of leaking out, we could say, going out, but the calcium's trickling in. See, now some of the calcium's inside. And these other calciums, they're going to also trickle inside. And that's going to hold that plateau. It's going to hold that depolarization. So even though some of the potassium is going to start leaving, they're all going to eventually leave, the calcium's also still coming in. So that's still creating an imbalance. So that's what happens in plateau. You have calcium to trickle in to the cell, just to kind of hold that depolarization. And then finally, you look at the last part. All the potassium leaves the cell. And remember, calcium's a door holder. So calcium, just like it held the door open so the sodium can come in, it's holding the door open so the potassium can go out. Then the calcium will start trickling out as well. But really, it's about the potassium leaving. So now we're kind of getting to a polarized state again. So this is repolarization, which you can associate with relaxation. Right? This action is going to lead to a cell relaxing. And then, so we're going to end up in a state where they've swapped places. Sodium was outside, extracellular, and now it's inside. Potassium is now outside. And so what they do is that they simply, before the next contraction, they swap places. So there's all these like pumps built into the wall here. There's all these like, they're called sodium potassium pumps, right? So what happens is that potassium will go in and that triggers a sodium to go out. It's like a revolving door. And every time one of those ions goes in, the other one has to come out. So then they just swap places and it happens really quick. Doesn't make a lot of sense that they have to because all they're going to do, what's going to happen in the next second? Sodium's going to rush back in. But that's what happens. So sodium rushes in, calcium trickles in, potassium rushes out, then they swap places, and then they start it all over again. So kind of weird, right? So sodium rushes in. So they're saying voltage-gated fast sodium channels. They're just special channels so that sodium can run in fast. Calcium is going to trickle in so that you see how it's saying voltage-gated slow calcium channels. They're special channels for calcium that let them come in, like trickle in, right? And then potassium is going to start running out. Then they swap places, and then we start this whole process again. I'm not going to go into membrane potential here because I feel like that adds like another layer of complexity to it. But this is essentially what is going on. Right? So sodium runs in, calcium starts to trickle in, calcium goes out, and that's repolarization. And then they're going to swap places again to the very beginning. This is a measurement of that activity. So this is an EKG. Some people call it ECG. So when you're looking at an EKG, I believe I have this in the next slide. There are 3 parts to it. So, and this is an idealized one. They never look like this in the field. But here's the P wave. Here's the second part, QRS complex. And then there's the T wave. So that's 3 parts. And I already put it on the next slide. So the P wave is going to be atrial depolarization. So you can imagine that if we go back to like the very first slide, or this one, atrial depolarization. So you imagine the active potential going from the SA node to the AV node, and that action potential is spread throughout the atria, right? And then the QRS is going to be as it's coming down, as the action potential is coming down here, and all these cells are going to start contracting. So let's go back. So atrial depolarization, which you assume leads to contraction. Ventricular depolarization, which you assume will lead to ventricular contraction. And then ventricular repolarization, which is a relaxation of the ventricles. So right there, atrial depolarization, ventricular repolarization, right? So this is talking about when you're taking an EKG, you're really looking at the electrical activity in the heart. It's not, you can make inferences about what the heart is going to do because of that. Okay, these should be contracting, these should not be contracting, but you can't know for sure. We were talking about bundle branch blocks. So this, when you have a bundle branch block, so you look at, this is one whole thing, right? And so there'll be some space before the next one, and then the other one will get a little bit, there'll be a little bit of space before the next one. Oh, I forget what drops off. I believe it's like the P wave drops off. Okay, whatever. I was going to try to explain it to you. Oh, there's some other things on here I can explain to you. This is a very typical MI. If this, because I see how they have this, if this segment is elevated, like if it were up here, or if you really couldn't see where the slope up goes for the T wave, because it's kind of up here, that would be like a very typical MI. But remember, there's like hundreds of these rhythms, and for me, I'm good with asystole when it's just flat. I know what that means, dead, and I know tachycardia is like that. And for me, that's about it. I'm not good at these things, but people know this stuff like really well. So, and then the QT interval. So when that's kind of elongated, when there's some kind of blockage, for example, like a pulmonary embolism, like when you have some kind of clot in the lungs, this thing could elongate out. But again, I mean, these things. This is a very typical EKG that you wouldn't see in the field. Oh, and we're at the end of the slide. So that is an introduction to cardiac conduction. And I will go on to the next